So I am Gina Anderson. I am the Ag and Natural Resources educator here in Floyd County. We've had bees on the property since 2016. So we've been doing this for a while. The beekeepers have done a lot in terms of helping me get things started and making sure that we're staying up on all the stuff. So this is what I've learned from them. It took me a little while to get everything figured out from them, but this is what I've learned. So I'm going to share my screen here and we will get started. And I'm going to make sure that I optimize it for video because I do have a video in it also. All right, so you should be seeing my screen and gotta let Greg in there. We will get started here. Leave that up there. All right. So some pitfalls in beekeeping. This is what I've learned through the years. And there's probably more than what I have listed, but this is just a quick overview. So the food, always important because we live in Indiana and food is not always available in terms of plants flowering and stuff. So where are the flowers? In one collection trip, a honeybee will visit between 50 and 100 flowers. So if the flowers are really spread out, then it's going to take a lot more energy for that bee to get to those flowers. And they'll actually fly up to 3 miles to search for nectar and pollen. I believe Cornell actually did a study, or Rutgers, one of them, and they found that if the food was really scarce, the bees would fly up to 7 miles. But if they're doing an average of 3 miles, that's 3 miles one way and 3 miles back. 6 miles to get a little bit of pollen and nectar is not a great return on investment. So you want to make sure some of those floral sources are close by. Not that you're planting right next to the hive, but that the hive is just in a spot where the floral resources are within a reasonable distance of the hive. And before we wrap up today, I'll show you a publication that Purdue has about planting for pollinators that you might find useful. Keeping some of the flowers that we don't necessarily think of maybe as pollinators. I know I have neighbors that don't like it that I keep the dandelions, but while they're not native, they are really important because they're the first ones blooming. I looked out my window this weekend and poof, there were a couple dandelions blooming. So as those bees are breaking cluster right now and looking for food, the dandelions are out there and they can get some pollen and nectar from them right now while we're still ramping up and waiting for trees to start to bloom and stuff. So if you have neighbors, encourage them not to spray their lawns and to keep the dandelions. Sumacs are also a really important species. People tend to confuse sumac with either maybe a walnut or tree of heaven. And really, there's 14 species that are found in the United States. It's more like a shrub, grows along the wood borders and railroad right-of-ways, and in kind of like what we'd call waste areas. But it's really important because it's blooming from June and July and maybe into August, depending on the location. And when it's doing that July and August blooming, that's when we're really having a lot of flowers not out. So it's providing that floral resource when not too many other things are blooming, which is really important because if you have to feed your bees year round, that's really expensive. Like if you're buying the sugar and having to mix it with water and everything. So making sure that you have floral resources throughout as much of our growing season as possible is really important. An example of a plant that you might find in your landscape would be the autumn joy sedum. I know I've been to Home Depot and the honeybees, I don't know where they were coming from, but they loved the sedum. So this is a late summer to fall one. Again, we're catching that later in the year floral resource, and it takes full sun to part sun. It's also really nice because it's pretty drought tolerant. It's got nice waxy leaves on it so that when we don't get a lot of rain, it's actually not going to die because it's holding its moisture. This is the publication. I will pull it up later in a more full view so you can see about the recommended Indiana native plants for attracting pollinators. And when I send out the link to the video, I'll send the link out to this as well. Other food sources include sugar water. So in the spring, that is a 1-to-1 ratio. In the fall, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And that's due to the fact we don't want a lot of extra moisture in the hive. Pollen patties, loose pollen, and honey cappings are all great sources. So when you're extracting the honey in the summer, putting those honey cappings back out, not directly in front of the hive so the hive gets robbed, but a little farther out, and allowing the bees to clean up that residual honey and take it back to the hive reduces their workload. I have a lot of beekeepers that put out loose pollen. They tend to use the elbows of gutters and put that pollen in and put a cap on it so that it's not coming out both ends is another option for feeding them and putting extra food out in the summer. There's pollen patties. I've lost bees because we didn't feed them in the summer. So thinking about how strong your hives are and what the weather's like will also dictate when you need to feed them and what you need to feed them. Hive space, also a pitfall that I have been victim to, I guess, as we've ran hives here at the office. And do you have an appropriate space? So in the first video that we did, we talked about knowing your bees and stuff. So the photo on the left, that gray hive, those bees naturally beard on the front. That's just what they like to do. And they were really weird, and they like to enter in the hive from the top and not the bottom. So that I had plenty of space for them. They just, if someone not knowing what those bees did every day were to look at them, they would assume that there wasn't enough space in that hive because of how they're acting on the front. I have other hives that we put a blank box on the right, like in the right, and they felt there was too much of a gap. So they started building their own comb and filling that space, which isn't good because as a beekeeper, some of you have kept bees for a couple of years now, that messes with how you extract honey. A lot of this are eggs. So all these cappings towards the back, those were all eggs and stuff that they were laying. So then when I take off the box, I could just damage those eggs. So making sure that we have that appropriate bee space, which also includes not mixing your equipment. So if you're buying boxes and frames from, let's say, Man Lake, and then you get a better deal at Dedant or another company, if you mix your hardware, you're probably going to end up with a weird bee space because each company puts the recommended bee space in a different spot. So double check that to make sure if you're intermixing hardware from other companies that your bee space is in the same spot all the time. This also happened that we didn't get out there soon enough, and they decided to do their own thing because they needed more frames and we weren't there to give them more frames. We just couldn't get out there due to weather and stuff. So they built their own stuff and made a huge mess out of this hive. As a beekeeper, this is not what you want your hive to look like. You want all the bees. You just don't want all the wax and comb on top of the frames and in between the frames and everywhere else where it makes it more difficult to pull those frames out without damaging them. So we couldn't get out there, and they decided after they ate their candy board to start building inside their candy board and doing weird stuff. So I encourage you, if you're keeping bees, to get out there as early as you can and check on them. This was last February. No, this was 2 Marches ago. So in 22, couldn't get out there. In March, we finally got out there because the weather broke and stuff. We could get out there on a good day. And they were going gangbusters, essentially. Tons of bees in the hive. And they just ran out of space. and they felt the candy board was in the way. So they had eaten out a lot of it. And that's where they built their comb at, because they needed to expand. Those bees are wired to start expanding, and they didn't have the space, so they made the space. That's why it's really, really important to go out. And I think we're going to have a good day on Friday. If you've got bees, Friday looks like it's going to be in the 60s. Might be a little rainy, but a great time to go out and check your bees to see how they're doing, if they survive that cold snap, and see if they need any other extra food to get them through, or maybe they need another hive box. Again, each colony is different, so we want to double check that. This is just a different angle of them building there, and the queen shouldn't have been up there, so if I had any eggs up there, that would have been a worker lane, but it's still a mess to try to clean up out of the candy board on its own right. So in the winter, oh, sorry about that. I don't know why that window closed. So we're going to, oh, it closed because my whole PowerPoint shut down. Give me 1 second. Why I'm getting this queued back up. Does anyone have any questions or comments right now? I know Greg's on here, and Greg's had bees for a while. Any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? I'm just going to make it kind of awkward while I pull up my PowerPoint again.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Pollen patties, what is the recommendation for when you should use them? I know it stimulates the bees and the brooding.
So I put pollen patties on only in the winter. I don't know,
Okay.
Greg, are you able to unmute? When do you put your stuff on? We'll see if I can get Greg to answer me.
Yep, I'm here.
Yay.
I do the same also. I put pollen patties on in the wintertime because of the weather and the limited flight. That way they have an emergency food source there in the hive. But I also put out dry pollen feeders, and I actually leave those out the majority of the.
Do you use the elbows like John does, like the gutter elbows?
We had a great carpenter, Kevin Fuchs, who put together some PVC pipes and some nice little housing, and yeah, that's what we all use.
Okay. Yeah, because you don't want the loose pollen to get wet, or else it's not going to be useful to the bees.
It's inside of PVC piping, and then it's in that PVC piping is inside its own little house.
Yeah, perfect. So Jeremy, hopefully that answers your question. And again, feel free to stop. I've got it queued back up. So we're going to see if my Zoom doesn't do something weird and shut down or something like that. Let me share this again. Okay. So, oh, it's thinking about it. Yay, there it is. So going into winter, which seems kind of weird because we're coming out of winter now, but going into winter, let's see here. The question's always, did you leave enough honey? Bees, while they've been around for a long time, and you would think they'd be really, really smart, if the honey is on either side of them and not directly above them, they don't always move where they need to get the honey. So we've seen, I think Greg's had the same thing happen, where they've had a couple frames on the outside that have been full of honey and the bees didn't eat them. And then they starved because the honey wasn't right on top of them. So we want to make sure that we get plenty of honey in that hive for them to keep. Usually it's a box, maybe 2 boxes, I guess, if your boxes are light. We always want to try to not waste honey. So this is, hopefully if my video works, he's harvesting this honey and is just running out, and we could have left it got damaged to the point that we couldn't use all of this, and we couldn't, at that point, we should have just put it back in the hive and let them clean it up. Because this frame just got demolished during harvest, and all of that honey is a great food source for them in the winter because it's their stuff. So if you have an issue where you've maybe damaged a frame or something like that, I would encourage you to put it back out towards the out by your beehives and let the bees clean something like this up and let them put it back for the winter so that you run enough. So a large box should be about 80 pounds, 50 to 80. And then if you're running mediums, those weigh a little bit less. So you might have to put a couple of those boxes on full of frames to get you enough honey. Did you winterize your hive? This is something that we have struggled with at my location forever. The first year that we did this, totally my fault. We covered it in like sleeves. So I bought the sleeves from a company. They were plastic with insulation inside of them. We covered the hives. So the hives were nice and toasty all winter long. What I lacked to do was I did not tilt the outside top cover. And because I didn't do that, any condensation that was created from the cold outside and the warm inside fell back on top of the bees, and they got wet and they died that winter. So we stopped covering them in that, and we've tried roofing paper to do that. I've used an old shower curtain. I've used many different things over the years just to try to keep the wind from blowing through the hive. It's not really to regulate the temperature because the bees regulate the temperature. It's really to keep that wind out. So that's always a tricky thing. You can put a quilt board inside of it. We've done that before. A quilt board, people make them different ways. I have some like cardboardy kind of stuff, some thick cardboard that we've put in there, and that helps absorb the moisture so it doesn't actually land on the bees. And then making sure if you're wrapping your hives, did you leave the bees a space to get out? Because they do have to vacate the hive every once in a while to use the restroom. So did you leave them a space to get out? And then equipment storage has also been a pitfall that we've seen. I keep my stuff in a shed. I don't get in that shed very often, which is part of the problem. But we have a mouse. So that picture on the left is a storage container. It's a really tough storage container, thick lid and everything. And she got hungry, I guess, or she thought that was going to be a great place to have her babies, and she chewed a hole through the lid and extended the opening. And so now I have a real issue with that because I don't keep any of my honey collecting supplies out there because I don't want the rodents to have their feces and stuff on it. So now I've got stuff stored in a shed and in my office because I can't seem to keep the mice out. So you might think about ways to exclude, rodents and things like that, so they're not getting in there and destroying your equipment. Because she's chewed up matches that we need. She's gotten in the fire starter that we have and ruined that. So think about that. And then also how you're storing your frames. So these frames were just kind of put in the shed and they got warm. Well, apparently when they got warm, they started to hatch some hive beetles. We've had hive beetles come out of our frames from storage because we didn't get them cleaned out good enough before we stored them. And we've had wax moths. So one thing to do if you're pulling frames out, you could put them in a garbage bag and put them in the freezer for a couple of days and try to freeze out any insects that might be in there to help kind of keep your insect pressure down. And then I have resources. So I kind of have left this open so we could talk about, things. Heather asked and if we could if you could build a temporary greenhouse-like structure around the hives. And I don't know that anyone's tried that. A lot of people have done straw bales around the sides to keep the wind out, or have bought siding. So the foam foam insulation, and strap that around to keep the wind out. The other thing is you have to do it in such a way that if you need to get in a hive, it's easy to take apart. So ratchet straps or bungee straps make life a lot easier to keep it kind of contained, but easy to take apart also. Are there other questions that we can field for you? Again, I kept this one kind of short because I want to answer questions that you all have or direct you to the right resources to help answer questions. It's a small group. It's a quiet group. While you think about that, let me pull up this other publication for you and share it. So Purdue does have a publication. It is called Recommended Indiana Native Plants for Attracting Pollinators. So if you're looking to provide food sources for your bees, not all of these would be great for honeybees. Some of these are better for other pollinators. This publication is POL-6-W, and it lists the different flowers, shrubs, trees, and grasses, where they grow best at in terms of full sun, parts of shade, wet soils, dry soils, how tall they're going to get, what the flower color is, and then which pollinators they connect to, whether it's a bee, a beetle, a butterfly, hummingbird, wasp, and if there's other species notes. So this is a great resource if you're looking to maybe improve a field or something near your house so your bees have access to food. Kenny Snyder, who got the Spring Valley Beekeeper started, always wanted to plant buckwheat because he could plant it in a rotation throughout the summer and have flowers most of the summer. I have stayed away from that because the one time I planted buckwheat, I ended up with Japanese beetles on my property, and I never had Japanese beetles until I did that. So I stopped planting buckwheat for that reason. But this is a list of the different things. As you can see, most of these will do for bees. Just want to make sure you plant it in a large quantity. So if the scout bee is coming out to find the flowers and there's only 2 or 3 flowers, that's not enough for the bees to come back to. So they really need a large swath of flowers to make it worth their time. Let's see here. Let me stop share here. We got a couple things in the chat. Okay. So Heather is asking about reusing old hive components, boxes, frames, etc., if they've been stored in a barn or a shed. I don't know. Alan, Jeremy, did you all buy new equipment? Did you buy used equipment? What's going on here? And then we'll answer Heather's question and we'll pull it all together here.
Well, my equipment's been a hodgepodge of hand-me-down, new, just whatever I can get my hands on. So
okay.
It's kind of all over the place.
Did you sanitize it at all, or they just told you it was clean with it?
Most of the used equipment I acquired had not been used in a long time, so I did not sanitize it. I just kind of scraped out any stray wax or comb and cleaned it up.
Okay.
Yeah. Which
Okay,
is
Alan,
probably maybe not the right way to do it, but just how I did it.
right. It probably would have been good to hit it with a little bit of bleach, just to make sure you didn't have any lingering things living there. Is always a good solution, but if you hit it with too strong of bleach, the bees won't like it. So you have to be careful of that. Okay. So yes, Heather, to answer your question, you can reuse the old hive components. If they've been stored in a box or in a barn or a shed, make sure they're still sturdy and make sure that they have been sanitized to some extent. I wouldn't do like a Lysol wipe, but a mild bleach solution to wipe them down just to make sure you don't have any wax moss there, or small hive beetle living there, or any potential bacteria that might affect the bees. All right, so Alan said he's finding bees in the chicken food, which includes the crash corn, the pelleted feed, mealworms. They find it in the chickens' outer run. Yes, they do that. And Greg, do you have the better explanation? I don't know that I have the full explanation as to why they do that.
No, but I have a similar situation where my bees are in the neighbor's chicken food. And what we're entertaining is changing the food. They use a pelletized kind of a powder, and we're wondering if there isn't a binder or something in there that they're attracted to. We tried to add additional pollen in the loose feeders to give them a probably a better source, but we're dealing with something similar over here also. And the only thought that we're left with is trying to change out the chicken food. Maybe something a little more whole grain or something of that nature. I'm not quite sure because I don't personally have chickens. It's just my neighbor's chickens. So the fear truly was that they would take in enough and store enough of this pelletized chicken food in the hive. And how would that affect the health of the hive over winter? So far, it doesn't seem to have affected it. Both my hives have made it through the winter so far. So I'm really curious about the same subject.
So, and I did do a quick Google search, and I won't say that it's research based yet, but it looks like maybe the bees are, say, some kind of like collecting some pollen. So maybe there's some pollen left from the corn, but I would find that hard to believe. Maybe minerals, since the bees need the minerals. So there might be something in that chicken feed that's got a mineral base in it. They say the dust and the yeast. I lean more towards maybe they're looking for the minerals in it, knowing that like we provide them fresh water, but they always end up at our ponds trying to get the minerals out of it. So the mineral seems to be more of a thing, but I will do a little bit more digging and see if I can't find a better answer to that. Usually the people that complain to me are about the bees going to the hummingbird feeders. So, you know, that's a different solution. Yeah, that's a take the feeder down for a few days and then the bees will leave it alone.
They'll find another source of sugar water and
they will.
I'll go back. That's what we've had to do with our hummingbird feeders in the past.
Yeah, so they are all about not having to exert more energy than needed, which makes sense because they only make about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in their lifetime. So you don't want to spend all your time flying around and not gathering nectar and pollen. What other questions do you have? I purposely did this as a short PowerPoint to help direct you all. If you don't have questions, that's okay. We can end early. Again, we actually had about 10 people sign up, but obviously only 4 of you joined. So
is this a recurring meeting that you have, Gina?
Is it a what? I'm sorry.
Reoccurring?
This is part 2. We did kind of some beginning basics a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And then I was going to do a third one in March, but I have no idea what the topic is. So if anybody has an idea for a topic they would like to hear, I am open to that.
Not at this time. If I come up with something, I'll think of it.
Well, that sounds great. I will tell the 2 of you that are on because Jeremy had to drop off. The Indiana Bee School is coming up. I don't know, Greg, if you're going to that or not. It's been a long time since I've been there. But it's coming up on February 24th, and it's going to be at the Horizon Convention Center in Muncie, Indiana. So if you are interested in going to the bee school, it is the 22nd bee school, if I'm reading my Roman numerals correctly. You can Google Indiana Beekeeper, and there will be a link on their page. There is a beginner track, so if you want to take the track that is already lined out for you, that is $65 for non-members and $55 for members. Both includes a lunch buffet, or you can just register and take whichever classes are available and not be on the beginner track. But that is the 24th of February, and the deadline to register is the 11th. Yes, Heather, I can talk about Spring Valley Beekeepers. So Spring Valley Beekeepers is the local organization of beekeepers. It was started, I don't know when Kenny started it. I don't remember. A long time ago. Greg comes sometimes. I go. Other beekeepers from the area, from Crawford County, Bedford area, Madison area, all kind of come. They share knowledge. So there's usually a topic for the night that they'll talk about. Let's see here. I have the email for this week. So let me tell you exactly what we're going to talk about this week. And that will help. This week is the first meeting on Wednesday night at 6:30 at Tunnel Hill Christian Church. They're going to update their mailing list. And the first question is always, how are your bees doing? So this will be a time for people to talk about if they've lost any hives or not, or why they think they lost hives. If you're in need of ordering new bees because you've lost bees, there'll be some information about that. Some other topics will be end of winter. So, okay, we're moving in to where we're starting to get those warmer days. How do you help your bees transition to that? And then talking about pollinator days. So this is really just a great way to share knowledge and meet others. And if you need a mentor or someone to come out and help you, there's tons of people with very diverse backgrounds in terms of beekeeping, where they've done it for a year, they've done it for 20 years, and they can come and help you figure out what's going on with your hives, if everything's going all right, or if you need to do something different. So that's what Spring Valley is, and there is no dues for it or anything like that. It's just a group of folks that get together. Clark County also has a bee group that does the same thing. I think they meet the third Wednesday of the month, but don't hold me to that. And then the bee school is if you just want to gather more information. It could be classes could be on mite control for the hives. It could be on winter feeding or summer feeding. It could be on new techniques. One year, there was a flow hive demonstration, so how that works. So these are just ways to increase your knowledge, just like you're attending this webinar, and I kind of gave you a brief, synopsis of some pitfalls in beekeeping. These are two other means to gather other information. If you need to order equipment, the bee school is a great place to do that at, because you can pre-order from the companies and pick it up and not have to pay for shipping. That's also a benefit of the bee school. Finding books to read about beekeeping. And that's kind of what the bee school is. What other questions do you all have? You can unmute if you want to chat, or you can just type in the chat box. I am game for whatever.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Heather.
Okay, I just figured it was easier than me typing. When you send the follow-up email to this class, would you mind maybe just including, I guess, a little bit of information about the bee school in there, just so, just for me later, so I could look up information about it?
Yep, I will add that in the email, as well as the stuff on Spring Valley.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. What other questions do you all have?
Heather, or this is Gina, this is Shelley Jett.
Oh, okay. You come across as Alan on my screen.
Yes, he set it up for me.
Gotcha.
anyway, I just wanted to put it out there that when I had failures last winter, and I've had failures every year, knock on wood, until this year,
Uh-huh.
I sent in comb and 100 dead bees to Maryland
Oh,
and
yes.
Beltsville, and they for free diagnosed it. And it ended up being a mite issue, but there was no nosema, nothing else going on. So I was able to reuse those frames. And I think that's good information for beekeepers
It
to
is.
do that.
I will look up, when I send this email, I will look up the Maryland lab and see about the contact information for there.
They actually utilize some of the information for my bees in a paper they just put out in January. That is fabulous information about
Good.
what's killing the bees and that sort of thing. Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, every year I seem to have lost. I got them through the first, like the second one or something like that, but every year we struggle with keeping the bees alive here.
Yeah.
But I think mine are always usually a winter kill. I have last year, I know for a fact it was a winter kill because they were fine after that deep freeze in December. And then we went out a month and a half later and they were dead. And the temperatures had been up in like the mid 50s and stuff. So they broke cluster and it must have dropped about 30 degrees the same day and they couldn't get back into cluster and they all froze in place.
Yep. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, thank